The deaf thing is more than I am looking for right now. That is the text a chief executive worth $200 million read alone at a restaurant table 2 days before Christmas, right before two little girls she had never met walked up and asked, in the only language that had ever truly seen her, if they could sit down. Before we find out what those two girls set in motion, tell me in the comments what city you are watching from tonight so I can see how far this story travels. And if you have ever quietly shown up for somebody who needed you, even when nobody asked you to, hit that subscribe button, because this story is for you. 2 days before Christmas, in a narrow duplex on the east side of Pittsburgh, Emmett Clay was losing a battle with a box of cereal. Iris had insisted on pouring it herself because she was 7 now, and 7-year-olds poured their own cereal. The result was a kitchen counter covered in a thin layer of oat flakes, and one daughter looking enormously satisfied with herself, while her twin sister June signed from across the table without looking up from her toast. "You missed the bowl again," June signed. Iris signed back, still chewing. "I was close." They had been signing at the breakfast table since before they could hold a spoon properly. Their mother Renee had been deaf, and in the 4 good years between the diagnosis and the end, Emmett had taught himself sign language so he could talk to his wife the way she deserved to be talked to, face to face. Hands moving in the light, nothing lost in translation. After she passed, a little over a year ago, the girls kept signing the way children keep doing things that remind them a person they loved was real. Emmett never asked them to stop. Some mornings the kitchen still felt like Renee was just in the other room, listening with her eyes the way she always did. He loaded the girls into the 15-year-old minivan they called the Old Dragon because it coughed 3 times before it started every morning, and Iris had decided years ago it was clearing its throat. He dropped them at his mother-in-law's house, a woman named Miss Della, who had strong opinions about jacket zippers and who had never once in 7 years let those girls leave her porch without both zippers pulled to the chin. Before bed each night, one of the girls would pull Renee's notebook from the shelf beside the kitchen window, the one with the soft cover and years of handwriting inside, and read one page out loud while the other signed along. They had been doing it since the week after the funeral, working through it slowly, 1 page a night, the way you move through something you are not ready to finish. Some pages were engineering notes in small blue ink. Some were letters Renee had written to nobody in particular, and on the very first page, underlined twice in her looping cursive, was a single sentence. "If one day I am not here, let these hands keep building bridges for those who cannot hear." The girls had memorized that sentence before they understood what it meant. Emmett suspected they understood it now. Miss Della zipped both jackets to the chin, the way she always did, and waved from the porch until the Old Dragon coughed its way around the corner. Emmett checked his bank app at a red light, $47 until Friday. He did not let his face change. He drove to work. He was a night maintenance worker at a company called Laurent Access Technologies, a building in the financial district that he cleaned 5 nights a week, from 11 at night to 5 in the morning. He earned $14 an hour. He carried a mop, a ring of keys, and a set of hands scarred with small round burns that had nothing to do with cleaning. The restaurant sat on Penn Avenue in downtown Pittsburgh. White tablecloths, candles that never dripped wax. Nadine Laurent sat across from a board member of her own company, a man named Preston Graff with a practiced laugh and a watch worth more than most people's monthly rent. She wore a simple black dress and her mother's old silver bracelet. The one thing she had kept from a time she still believed love came without conditions. Nadine was deaf, had been since birth. She ran the largest accessibility technology company on the East Coast and had long since learned to read a room by watching hands, not hearing voices. For an hour, the conversation moved politely enough. Then Preston excused himself. Her phone buzzed against the tablecloth. "The deaf thing is more than I am looking for right now. Take care." She read it twice. Her face did not move. She had spent 38 years learning how to hold her expression in place while the world confirmed what it thought of her. Around her, forks clinked. Couples laughed. The restaurant hummed with warmth that suddenly had nothing to do with her. Her hand trembled slightly as she signed for the check. The waiter saw the tremor, and his expression shifted from polite to pitying, and somehow the pity was worse than the message itself, because it assumed she needed something from him rather than simply deserving not to have been treated this way in the first place. That was when two small girls appeared at her table. 7 years old. Twins. Braided hair, with the seriousness only children carry when they have decided something matters. One lifted both hands and signed slowly, carefully, the way someone signs who has practiced in the car on the way over. "Can we join you? You look very sad." Nadine sat still. It had been years since a stranger had used her language first, unprompted, in a room built for people who could hear. Emmett came half jogging across the dining room, face flushed, reaching for both girls' hands. Tall, broad through the shoulders in a way that came from physical work, not a gym. His jacket bore a maintenance company logo, the fabric worn thin at the elbows. He crouched to sign an apology to his daughters. Nadine caught his hands, not romantically, just noticing a detail that did not fit. His palms were covered in small round scars, clustered and precise, not from a mop bucket, from a soldering iron hundreds of times on skin that kept coming back for more. The girls would not leave. Small fists closed around Nadine's sleeve, hands still moving. "Daddy said Christmas is for not being alone." In the most unguarded moment she had allowed herself in years, Nadine nodded. Let them stay. Something shifted in the room after that. Not loud, not dramatic. Just the quiet rearrangement that happens when a person who has been performing composure for 2 hours is suddenly given permission to stop. The girls treated her the way children treat anyone who takes them seriously, with total trust and no regard for rank. June asked whether her bracelet was real silver. Iris asked whether she could sign the word for cake, and when Nadine showed her, both girls practiced it 6 times until the motion was crisp, and Nadine laughed the way a person laughs, who has forgotten what it feels like to be the reason someone smiles. Emmett sat stiff, backed through the meal, mostly silent, reaching over only to correct a daughter's signing when her hands moved too fast. Nadine watched him do it, watched the way he looked at his girls, fierce and afraid at once, like a man who had already lost one person he loved and was not sure how many more the world would let him keep. When the girls ran off to wash their hands, Nadine signed a question straight at him. "Why are you so fluent?" He answered in 4 signs. Had to be. That is all. Then he called for the check before she could ask more. Snow had started outside, thin and dry. Nadine watched him walk his daughters out through the glass doors, one small hand in each of his, and something in her that had gone quiet a long time ago sat up and paid attention. The next morning, before Nadine had set her coffee down, an email arrived from the board. Temporary suspension of executive authority, proposed motion. The reasoning cited communication barriers that may impact critical strategic decisions. The signature belonged to Preston Graff, the same man who 12 hours earlier had texted her that her deafness was more than he was looking for. She read it 3 times before she let herself feel anything. She rode the elevator to the basement, past 47 floors of people who had smiled at her in the corridor that morning, without knowing that the man who had taken her to dinner the night before had already begun the process of removing her from every one of those floors. Emmett was on his back beneath the building's aging SHVAC unit, forearms streaked with grease. His daughters were sitting cross-legged nearby, signing to each other about something that made them both laugh without sound. The girls saw Nadine first. They ran to her, arms wrapping around her waist like she was someone they had known for years. Emmett slid out fast, told them to wait in the truck, and stood there with grease on his face and an expression that said he had already calculated every way this could go wrong. Before either of them could speak, an old security guard named Frank Ochoa shuffled past with a mop cart, moving slow enough that it looked accidental. He pressed a small USB drive into Nadine's palm without breaking stride and murmured just loud enough for her to read his lips. "Mister, Clay is not just fixing pipes, ma'am. The servers have been logging his access for 14 months. Thought you should know before somebody else decides what to do about it." Nadine locked her office door before she opened the drive. What loaded onto her screen made her sit down slowly. Patch after patch. The exact fixes that had kept the company's screen reader software from collapsing 8 months earlier. The update that had won them a federal accessibility contract in the spring. 3 security vulnerabilities closed before engineering ever flagged them, all time-stamped between 11 at night and 5 in the morning, all traced to a maintenance account that technically had no server access at all. She found Emmett in the old server room an hour later. He did not deny it. He did not even look surprised that she knew. "My wife was deaf," he said, not looking up from the cable he was coiling. "She got sick 5 years ago. She passed a little over a year ago. I taught myself to sign so I could talk to her. Then I taught myself to code because the software this company built barely worked, and she needed it to work to keep her job." He set the cable down. "After she passed, I kept writing the patches every night. It was the only way I still knew how to talk to her." He paused. "She used to work in this building, accessibility department, 5 years back. Got let go for not fitting the company culture." Nadine went very still. Who approved that termination? Emmett did not answer. He did not have to. And Nadine understood then, in a way she would carry for the rest of her life, that the man standing in front of her had spent 14 months repairing a system built by the company that had fired his dying wife, not for revenge, not for credit, but because the people who still needed that software to function were not the people who had made the decision to let her go. The unauthorized access report against Emmett, flagged directly to legal, had been filed the same night Preston sent the rejection text. Same approver on both documents. Same cruelty dressed up 2 different ways. Preston was not just trying to remove Nadine, he was 4 days from a hostile takeover vote and needed 2 pieces of evidence to make it stick: a failing accessibility division and a maintenance worker who had broken into company servers. He had been engineering both, and he planned to sell the entire disability technology division to a competitor with no interest in keeping it running. Emmett was fired before lunch the next day. He lost his staff housing within the hour. By evening, with a police complaint already sitting on a detective's desk and a criminal interview scheduled, a caseworker stood in his driveway explaining that his daughters would be placed in temporary care while the situation was assessed. Emmett stood on the porch step and watched 2 strangers buckle Iris and June into a car that was not his, and the girls signed to him through the window as it pulled away. Iris pressed both palms flat against the glass the way her mother used to press her palm against the hospital window on the mornings Emmett had to leave before visiting hours ended. June kept signing the same word, over and over, smaller each time. Home, home, home. He stood on that step long after the car turned the corner, because moving would have meant accepting that the house behind him was now, for the first time in 7 years, empty. Nadine had tried to stop it. She went to the board with the full scope of what Emmett had built, every patch, every fix, every night of unpaid work that had kept their flagship product from failing. She stood in front of 9 people who had known her for a decade and signed her argument while an interpreter spoke it aloud, watching their faces for the particular tightening around the eyes that meant they were already thinking about how to frame their no. The board postponed the takeover vote 7-4, and for 6 hours it felt like a win. Preston moved faster. The criminal complaint was upgraded from misdemeanor to felony unauthorized computer access. Nadine was suspended from her role as CEO. The accessibility division, the one Emmett had kept alive with 14 months of unpaid midnight work, was formally shuttered the same day. The girls were moved to a longer foster placement. Emmett spent the night in a holding cell on a thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, wondering if his daughters would remember years from now that their father had tried, or if all they would carry forward was the night someone decided he was not enough. Somewhere across town, Miss Della sat on her porch swing, the one Emmett had rebuilt for her free 2 summers back, and said to no one in particular that man has never once asked this neighborhood for anything. She did not know yet how to help. She just knew something had gone very wrong. That night, a message arrived on Nadine's phone. 18 seconds long, sent from a caseworker's tablet by someone who understood exactly what these 2 girls needed to say and to whom. June's face filled the screen, chin trembling, hands moving in short, careful bursts. Daddy's hands are sad. The bad man said he will break them forever. Please do not let him. Nadine watched it 4 times. She did not cry. She had trained herself a long time ago not to. Because crying in front of hearing people had always turned into evidence that she was too emotional to be trusted with anything important. Preston moved first the next morning. The rejection text was already circulating, screenshotted and stripped of context, paired with restaurant security footage someone on his payroll had obtained. Nadine alone at that white tablecloth table, wiping her face before the twins had ever appeared. Captioned, "Unstable CEO exploits her own disability for sympathy." By noon, the stock had dropped 11%. The board suspended Nadine without asking for her side. Nadine sat alone in her apartment that night with the lights off. She raised her hands into the empty room and signed slowly to no one. "I am sorry." She did not know who she meant it for anymore. She thought about her mother's bracelet still on her wrist and what her mother used to sign to her whenever the world got too loud. You do not have to be understood to be worthy of love. You only have to be true. The press conference was scheduled for 10 the next morning in the largest hall Laurent Access Technologies owned, packed with more than 200 reporters and cameras. Preston stood at the podium in a charcoal suit, voice smooth and rehearsed. He talked about necessary stability and responsibility to shareholders. When he reached the part about Nadine, he lowered his voice half a register as if what he said next pained him personally. "We simply need leadership our stakeholders can trust without complication," he said. Given the communication difficulties involved in crisis leadership, the board feels. He never finished the sentence. The doors at the back of the hall opened. Iris and June Clay walked in side by side, a caseworker a respectful few steps behind. They wore clothes from the placement home. Nothing staged. But their eyes were sharp, entirely certain of what they had come to do. The room went silent the way 200 adults go silent when 2 children walk onto a stage built for scandal. Nadine sat in the front row, spine straight, hands folded, refusing to let her face give him anything to photograph. She had rehearsed this moment overnight. The walk, the silence, the dignity she had refused to surrender. She had not rehearsed for what happened next. Nadine went white. She rose halfway out of her chair, one hand pressed flat against her chest, the silver bracelet cold against her collarbone. She recognized the notebook before she recognized anything else. She had seen its twin on Emmett's workbench days earlier. Whatever these girls carried, they had not been coached to bring it. Iris raised the worn spiral-bound notebook above her head, open toward the cameras. Every page was covered in handwriting, two hands layered over years. Neat, cramped engineering notes in blue ink, and beneath them, in looping cursive, the sentence underlined twice. "If one day I am not here, let these hands keep building bridges for those who cannot hear." June signed the rest, and a young interpreter near the stage, a company employee who had learned sign language and never expected to use it like this, began translating aloud, her voice shaking only slightly. "Our daddy never broke into anything. He fixed the holes the bad man left on purpose so the project would fail so he could sell it. Our daddy fixed it every night for free because he loved our mommy and he loves us. And this company was the last place that ever meant something to her." The live stream crossed 1 million views in 18 minutes. Then came the moment nobody in that room expected. Preston's own son, a young man seated in the middle rows, stood up and said 2 sentences that collapsed everything his father had built. "My father has a daughter he has hidden from the world since she was small. She is deaf, and he sent her away so no one at his firm would ever have to know." Preston did not move. For the first time in his career, he had nothing rehearsed to say. Security moved in, not to protect him, but to get him off the stage. Within hours, the takeover plan collapsed. Board members who had voted with Preston began issuing statements, distancing themselves as fast as their legal teams could draft them. The district attorney's office quietly moved to drop the charges against Emmett before the evening news cycle. By 9 that night, Nadine Laurent was reinstated as CEO with full authority over every decision touching the accessibility division. Nobody argued the terms. A guard unlocked a cell door that evening and told Emmett he was free to go. Emmett just sat on the thin bench, hands loose in his lap, staring at the guard like the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. The guard said it again, slower. "You are free. Charges dropped about an hour ago. Your daughters are still with the county for tonight. That is a family court matter separate from this one, and it will not move this fast. But this part is real. You can walk out that door right now." Emmett walked out into a light Pittsburgh rain, not knowing any of what his daughters had done on a stage in front of 200 cameras while he sat in a cell 3 miles away believing he had already lost them. Nadine was waiting just outside the intake doors, hood up against the rain, a folder tucked under one arm. She had been standing there long enough that her shoes had gone dark at the toes, but she had not let herself sit down. She did not offer him a job. She did not offer him a thank you gift or a title or any of the things people offer when what they really mean is, "I feel guilty, and I want this to be over." She held out the folder. Inside was a single blank contract. "You write the terms," she signed. "I will just sign." Emmett looked at the blank page for a long moment like a man who had been handed something he did not trust because nobody had ever handed him anything without a catch attached. Then he found a bench under the overhang, sat down, and picked up the pen. He wrote slowly, in the same handwriting the whole world had just seen on that notebook, head of the newly restored Accessibility Technology Division. Final authority on product decisions. A permanent policy that no deaf employee could ever again be dismissed for not fitting company culture. And the project renamed not after him, not after Nadine, but after the woman who had started it all 5 years before either of them understood what it would cost and what it would eventually give back. Nadine read every line and signed without hesitating on a single word. The Accessibility Division relaunched that spring under Renee Clay's name, with Emmett's photograph on the internal announcement, not smiling too widely, exactly the way he appeared in most photographs, standing straight in a clean company badge beside a small plaque bearing his late wife's name. Frank Ochoa, the security guard who had slipped Nadine that first USB drive, was there for the unveiling too, standing near the back of the room in his same worn uniform, looking for once like a man who had been thanked properly for something he never expected credit for. 3 days later, a family court judge reviewed the dropped complaint, the formal withdrawal, and a stack of character statements from neighbors and co-workers. Iris and June came home to their father on a gray, rainy afternoon that felt to all three of them like the first real breath any of them had taken in weeks. Before they reached the front door, they ran to Nadine first, small arms wrapping around her waist, quick and fierce, and only then turned to their father, who dropped to one knee on the porch. Iris signed first. "We told everyone the truth, Daddy. We used our hands like you taught us." Emmett laughed, a short, wet, disbelieving sound, half a sob dressed up as something lighter. He signed back the only thing he could manage. "I know, baby. I know. I saw." He had not seen it. Not really. Only heard the story from Nadine over the past 3 days, replayed until he knew every beat of it by heart. It did not matter. He meant it the way a father means most things he says to his children, true in every way that counted, even if the facts arrived a little out of order. Nadine and Emmett looked at each other for one long second over the girls' heads. Neither of them signed anything. Neither of them needed to. 3 months passed. No wedding, no grand proposal, just quiet evenings in the same small duplex where cereal still ended up on the counter and the old Dragon minivan still coughed 3 times before it caught in the cold. Nadine started coming by most Thursdays after the girls' bedtime routine wound down. She sat on Emmett's worn living room couch, sleeves pushed up, learning how to hold a soldering iron steady in hands that had spent 20 years signing board presentations instead of fixing circuit boards. The first few attempts went badly enough that Emmett kept a small fire extinguisher within reach. The girls had taken to narrating her progress like sports commentators, signing dramatic play-by-plays from the kitchen doorway whenever she managed a clean connection. "You are gripping it like it owes you money," Emmett told her one night, guiding her wrist with 2 scarred fingers, gentle in a way his hands did not look like they should be capable of. "Loosen up. It is not going anywhere." She laughed, a real one, surprised out of her before she could catch it, and the solder finally sat clean. Most nights the girls wedged themselves between the 2 adults on the couch, signing rapid-fire stories about their new teacher who had started learning basic sign language herself after Iris mentioned, very matter-of-factly, that Miss Nadine basically taught our whole school. Neither Emmett nor Nadine corrected them. It was not far from true. Miss Della from 2 doors down still came by some Sundays with a plate of something warm from her oven, settling into the porch swing that still creaked on the 3rd push. She would watch Nadine help the girls with their homework through the front window and shake her head slowly, smiling to herself. "Told you something would turn out right for that man," she would say to nobody, the way old women on porches have said true things to nobody for as long as there have been porches. Each night before bed, one of the girls still pulled Renee's notebook from the shelf. They had nearly reached the last page now. Some nights, Nadine was there to listen, and Emmett would catch her watching the girl's hands move through his wife's words with an expression he recognized because he had worn it himself. The look of someone discovering that a person they never met had already, years earlier, written exactly the thing they needed to hear. One particular Thursday, snow falling steady outside the window. The same kind of snow that had been falling the night two little girls first walked up to a stranger's table. Emmett set a mug of tea down in front of Nadine and sat across from her, hands moving slow and deliberate, choosing each sign the way a man chooses words he has been holding on to for a while. "I do not need saving," he signed. "I just need to be seen as I am." Nadine looked at him for a long moment. Then she raised her own hands and answered simply, "Me too." 4 hands, 2 large and scarred, 2 small and still learning, came together under the warm kitchen light and signed the same word, one after another, like a chain. Home, on the bookshelf Emmett had built the summer before Renee passed. The notebook sat in its place of honor now, its cover soft with age, beside a new photograph of the 4 of them taken the week before at a little diner near Liberty Avenue. Nobody in the photo was smiling too widely. They were simply looking straight into the camera, steady, the particular kind of calm that only belongs to people who have walked through a storm together and chosen afterward to stay. Iris had picked the photograph's spot on the shelf herself, right beside her mother's notebook, and explained her reasoning with the seriousness only a 7-year-old can manage. "So Mommy can see, we are okay now." Emmett had not trusted his voice enough to answer that one out loud. He had just signed yes, over and over, until Iris seemed satisfied he understood. That night, once the girls were finally asleep and Emmett had walked Nadine to the door the way he always did, she went home, turned off her lights, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, fell asleep without keeping one hand near her phone, waiting for a rejection she had trained herself to expect. And somewhere across town, a man in a kitchen still lit with warm light raised his scarred hands and sent a short video message. His signs steady and unhurried, captioned in careful, deliberate text beneath. "Thank you for not seeing me as a charity case." Nadine read it twice, the way she had once read a very different message on a very different night at a table she would give almost anything to forget. She noticed her own hand was not shaking this time. She saved the message and did not delete it, and found herself watching it once more before she fell asleep. The way a person returns to a sentence that has finally, after a long time, said the thing they were waiting to hear. This story reminds us that the people the world is quickest to overlook are so often the ones carrying the most weight quietly, without ever asking anyone to notice. A man in a thrift store jacket can be building something in the dark that saves an entire company. A woman who cannot hear a single spoken word in a crowded room can still hear, better than most of us ever will, exactly who is telling her the truth and who is only performing kindness. And 2 7-year-old girls with a notebook full of their mother's handwriting can walk into a room built to destroy their father and change everything with 4 small hands and 1 sentence their mother wrote before any of them understood what it would cost. So let me ask you something tonight. Has anyone ever walked into a room where you were sitting alone and simply sat down beside you, without being asked, without needing a reason, and changed the way you understood what you deserved? Tell me about it in the comments. I read every one. And if this story stayed with you, you know what to do. New stories every week.